Hard to believe that the NFL season also is right around the corner. Great book just released earlier this week, and we are thrilled to have the author on, um, Ian O'Connor. He is a four-time New York Times bestseller, and the new book out is Out of the Darkness: The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. Ian, welcome to the show. Got to tell you, we heard the title right away. We went, okay, this could be good. So let's start first off. Congrats on the book.
Thanks, Larry.
Sure, you've had such great success. Tell us to start kind of how this came about and what prompted you to kind of take on this project.
I was actually scheduled to do a LeBron James biography, and unfortunately for me at the time, another LeBron book came out, and I thought if I continued with my project, it might be a little bit too much LeBron fatigue there. So I actually was looking for a trade, and then Aaron Rodgers got traded into my backyard in New York. And I thought he's probably the most polarizing athlete in American sports right now, might be the most prominent American male athlete who hadn't had a defining bio written about him. I was fascinated from afar. And so I decided to dive in. And I actually, Vince Lombardi coached in my high school in New Jersey. And so I was always intrigued by the mystique of the Packers and wanted to write a Packers book at some point in my career. And I guess this is the one.
So, was there anything that jumped out at you that just shocked you that you weren't anticipating when you started to pull back the curtain on Aaron Rodgers?
Well, Mike, I think the one thing that stood out was just how loved he is by his current and former teammates. I didn't know when you consume media coverage of Aaron Rodgers over the last, particularly 3 years, it's basically 90% negative. And I know when he arrived in New York, the players and the fans were just like, wow, they just couldn't believe how good of a teammate and leader he was. Hard Knocks, the show, actually helped him a lot. He didn't want to do that show. The Jets didn't want their cameras in there, and it turned out to be a great thing, particularly for him. And just talking to his teammates throughout his career in Green Bay, and of course also here in New York, it's almost universal the respect and admiration they have for him. That I have to admit was surprising. There were only really two guys who have criticized him over the years: Greg Jennings and Jermichael Finley, and both those guys are very distinguished NFL players who had the right to their opinion. And so, yeah, I respect what they had to say. And they actually said a lot of positive things about Aaron as well. But across the league, I talked to one longtime NFL official who said, I actually hate Aaron Rodgers. I can't stand what he stands for. But I have to admit, I've never met an NFL player who doesn't like him. And I pretty much found that as well.
Talking again to Ian O'Connor, the book again, Out of the Darkness: The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. I think that's one of those things. Do you find you? I'm not going to date you. We've done this for a number of years, obviously. Do you find now that the social media impact and the social impact really affects these personalities more than it did maybe 20 years ago? Or am I overstating that?
I don't think you're overstating that at all, Larry. I think Aaron, for one, he's a very well-read guy, and I think I would never say this or rarely say this about anyone, but I think he reads too much. And I think on the internet, maybe reading the wrong material from the wrong corners of the internet has maybe impacted some of his beliefs. But he's a social media creature without question, and someone who has generated more copy, old school term, than any other athlete. And I've had people say, Aaron only won one championship, and yet he's still the most talked about player in the NFL. And I think social media has a lot to do with that. And it's different today because obviously the greats of the past didn't have to deal with the 24/7 scrutiny of the internet and people having cell phone cameras everywhere you go. And so that's something that has elevated Aaron's fame, but at the same time has put his beliefs under a white hot spotlight. And he's had to deal with that as a public figure.
You have done a ton of biographies of greats such as Bill Belichick, Mike Krzyzewski, Derek Jeter, Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer. With looking at Aaron Rodgers, is there any string of personality traits that he had that go in line with some of these other greats that you have written books on?
Very good question. I think so. He has a hard time, and I found the greats I've covered over the years and most of my career, all of it really has been in New York, have one thing in common. They have a hard time saying I'm wrong or I'm sorry. And I think I figured this out. And it's coaches and players, the greats of the greats. If they admit weakness or fault in any way, they're afraid that's going to follow them into the competitive arena and compromise their mission, which is to be an all-time great. And you only do that by winning and winning big. And so I was shocked when I asked Aaron Rodgers, or at least surprised, about his COVID-19 stance back in August of 21, when he said those 4 words that changed his life. Yeah, I've been immunized, when he was unvaccinated. The truth came out and it really hurt him. And I don't think he's recovered from that public relations hit. But he said, well, I said to him, if I were there in that room as a columnist, I really don't think I would have ripped you in my column if you told your truth at the time, which is you were allergic to an ingredient in Pfizer and Moderna, and you were concerned about Johnson & Johnson side effects. Why didn't you just say that? Because I thought that was I was vaxxed, but I thought that was a somewhat reasonable position. And he effectively said, yeah, I should have told my truth. I didn't. He regretted it because he said, it's the one thing critics today still have on me that I feel they have on me. So he admitted a mistake. And I can't remember Aaron Rodgers admitting a mistake, a weakness, a fault, really, in any other context. So yeah, that's the one trait I found in all the iconic figures that I've profiled is they rarely ever say I'm wrong. And I do think it has something to do with them in the competitive arena.
That's a great, and Mike, that was a great question and a great perspective. You're right. As you're talking, I'm going through some of the minds of the more abrasive sports personalities we run into over our lifetimes. And you're exactly right. I think Bob Knight would be another one that would be probably sitting at sitting on the throne of that, right?
Absolutely. And even like I covered a lot of Tiger Woods' career. Tiger was not one to admit weakness or fault, and that's why he's the greatest ever, or one of the reasons why. And so, yeah, I was always fascinated. Coach K, another guy, I wrote a book about him, and he never ever admits that he was wrong about anything. He's never said the words "I'm sorry," and it's always, yeah, maybe I should have done this, but also you should have done that, and you should have done that. There's a lot of deflection of blame when it comes to these iconic sports figures, and that's something that they have in common with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I remember the 04, and I've told the guys the story, the 04 Final Four, when Duke comes out against UConn in the second game of the Saturday night semifinals, and they commit 7 fouls before the first media timeouts. And Krzyzewski then spends the entire timeout cursing out the refs, who then calls 6 straight fouls on UConn. I mean, it just was. And so, it was funny that the people at home didn't realize what happened. I'm like, well, no, what you're missing is he ends up losing in the end because the refs swallowed their whistle. JJ Redick is fouled in the final seconds. They don't know that the public didn't see this. And he's mad at everybody else. And I'm like, yeah, that thing you did at the 16-minute mark probably cost you the game. But to your point, he wasn't going to admit that. And like you said, I always talk about too, that we have to be different. That makes our society fun. If we were all just the same and thought the same, it wouldn't be quite as exciting.
Right. Actually, Coach K is the most profane person I've ever sat behind at a game. And people are shocked when they hear that because he was a saint-like figure for many years in college basketball, but parents and friends of players can't sit behind that Duke bench, or couldn't when he was coaching, because the profanity was far worse than the drunken sailors. I can assure you of that.
Yeah. His wife, Mickey, may have been right behind him. So, Mike, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sure you have a question.
It's interesting to me to listen to the thread of how Aaron compares to these other figures that you've had the privilege of writing books about. Do you have any thoughts on what we can expect from him? Obviously, you can't predict health. You're not a doctor. But what can we expect with this Jets team and him together based on what you know of how he builds relationships with teammates, et cetera?
After the disaster of last year, and I was in the building when that happened, and I've never been more heartsick for a fan base and a player than I was that night. They both invested so much in that. The Jets fan base, which has been haunted for decades, they haven't seen their team in the Super Bowl since January of '69, had a love affair last summer with Aaron Rodgers. They didn't care about his conspiracy theories and other beliefs. They took him in as one of their own, and Aaron was really invested in making it happen in New York. And to have that ripped away 4 snaps in was brutal that night. It really was. But I do think this year it's almost like I feel the football gods owe Jets fans and Aaron Rodgers one. I think they're going to be an 11-6 kind of team. I think he'll make 14 starts and have a pretty big year. I don't think it'll be an MVP year, but I think he's got 1 or 2 good seasons left in him. I think they're in the playoffs, assuming relative health, particularly on the offensive line. And I think Aaron will. I think he'll come through. I do. And they have Tyrod Taylor, who's a very good backup. I could see him going 2-1 in the 3 starts he'll inevitably make in the middle of the season when Aaron's banged up. So the Jets, these haunted franchises, as we know, they usually do break through. Whether it was the Cubs, 8 years ago, the Red Sox in 2004, even the New York Rangers in hockey when Messier won them a Stanley Cup in '94 after a 54-year drought. And so at some point, the Jets are going to win the Super Bowl. I'm turning 60 in a few days. I hope I'm alive when that happens. I'd actually like to see it. I was 4 years old the last time they won it. So, and Aaron Rodgers winning it for the Jets, which is not impossible, would be the biggest New York sports story of my lifetime.
Well, and to your point, that's one thing when you get on Aaron Rodgers is that he's like Reggie Jackson. He's Mr. October. I mean, I don't care how many times in Green Bay did they struggle early and, oh, geez, they're done and he's done and let's get rid of him. And all of a sudden they catch fire late. And in the playoffs, I mean, to me, there was no, if, and I'm a Bear fan, so that's suffering of my own. If you're facing Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs, I'm my team. I'm concerned if he's against my team. He always finds a way in January to come through, and I think that's where, if you're a Jets fan, there's hope there.
People look at it and it's like, how did this guy only win 1 ring? And he, even when he's lost, and he's had bitter postseason losses with McCarthy and with LaFleur, but he's also in those seasons had magical moments in sudden death games that a lot of that's been forgotten from 2013 to 16. If you look at those 4 seasons that end in postseason failure, he actually made incredible sudden death plays in those seasons, and that with other teams and other coaches might have advanced the Packers to the Super Bowl. But he's got the 1 ring, and I do think that at the end of his career, he's very worthy of getting that second one. I almost feel like if he wins one for the Jets in New York, that it would feel like 3 rings. It really would, because of the Jets having not been there since Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, and it's New York City. So I think Aaron saw opportunity in the Jets. I have a ring with an iconic franchise, the Green Bay Packers, and now to try to win one with a Charlie Brown-like franchise, the Jets, where everything always goes wrong, would, I think, elevate his historical standing in a profound way.
The last question I had is did you find anything out about that relationship with Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre? To me, that's such an incredible thing to see such uber talented players for so long following one another at the same position.
Yeah, Brett Favre did not treat him well. Those first couple of years were really rough on Aaron, and he would tell his family members and friends that Brett's icing me out. He's inviting people on hunting trips and not me. And Brett, I can understand it from Brett's perspective. He was a legend. He made the Packers again after the down years following the glory years of Lombardi and Starr. And here he was sitting there, sitting next to him was the man they hired to replace him. That's a tough thing to deal with every day. And Brett did not deal with it well. If you were a backup quarterback who wasn't a threat, he was your best friend. He was your next door neighbor who would do anything for you. But Aaron was a clear and present danger and threat to be eliminated in Brett's mind if he could. And so, yeah, that was tough on Aaron. Practical jokes that humiliated him and some other things that Brett did. But in later years, and I think their relationship did get better that final year Brett was in Green Bay before they turned it over to Aaron. But in later years now, they have a pretty good relationship because Aaron got kicked out too. So he knows now what Brett felt when they went to Jordan Love. It was not fun. It didn't feel good that I'm a first ballot Hall of Famer for this franchise, did a ton of great things, and they're effectively shoving me out the door. I understand that Aaron wanted the trade to the Jets, but to me, that was more like a firing. And he felt the sting of that. And he ultimately felt what Brett did back in 2008. So their relationship today is actually not bad at all.
It's just a fascinating story, and we can't wait to read the book that is now out of the darkness, the mystery of Aaron Rodgers. Ian O'Connor, no better person to write this. Congrats on the book again. We can't wait to read it, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you again when you have your next book that comes out.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Once
you.
again, Ian O'Connor, and the book is Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. By the way, Ian, again, knows what he's doing. 4-time New York Times bestselling author. Great to have him here on the show. We've got more to come. Stay with us right here.